Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
So we have Arlene Herson, now world-class, but we call her really a celebrity, especially here in South Florida now, although she's been a celebrity all over the country for many years. But you've kind of settled down here in South Florida, haven't you, Arlene?
I have, and I must say, originally reluctant to move to Florida, and I have to say it's one of the best things I've ever done. There are so many opportunities down here, so many interesting things happening. Everybody doesn't come to Florida to retire. I know I certainly haven't.
Nor have I.
And I'm blessed living in South Florida.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because we do know a lot of people who are famous and have done spectacular things, and maybe they don't wind up living here year-round, but we certainly have them. But you in your lifetime, of course, have met so many celebrities. And I wanted to ask you a very sincere question. Have they changed your life?
Well, you know what has changed my life? Having all these opportunities. For many, many years, as you know, I've had a talk show on cable television interviewing celebrities. I have gotten to know so many interesting things about celebrity-type people that most people don't know. It has enhanced my life. I do research, a lot of research, which I think is very important in life. So doing research for my television show has kind of inspired me to do research on various things that I'm involved in. I mean, I know we have so many things to talk about, but the kind of things I find out about people, like Tony Bennett. I interview celebrities in their office, hotel, everything on location. I interviewed Tony Bennett twice, once in his apartment in New York City on West 56th Street, and once in Atlantic City. So I asked people, did you ever hear about how Tony Bennett decided to become a singer? So, Anita, have you ever heard?
No, not Tony Bennett, but there are many people I've heard as little kids. They do this through maybe singing in church or singing in temple, but I'm sure everyone has their own story.
Yeah, well, but Tony Bennett, just to be quick, was in the Army. And he was a sergeant at that time. And his sergeant, the man who was in charge of him, everybody loved Tony Bennett. He liked to sing and in the locker room. And so his sergeant invited him to a dinner and said, bring a date. Well, he didn't have a date. So he brought his best friend, who happened to be black. His sergeant was mortified. The only black person in the room was Tony Bennett's friend. So the next day he demoted Tony Bennett, demoted him to private, put him in graves registering the dead people who were coming in. Everybody knew about this. Everybody knew it was unfair. A doctor came up to him one day and said, I know you like to sing. We know you don't belong here. If you would like, I can get you out of this detail and a job singing with the Army Band. And Tony Bennett says in his own words on my show, that's what gave me the idea to be a singer.
That is spectacular. That really is a terrible thing that happened, and it turned into something so important.
Well, so much in our life, so many things that we think are going to be negative turn out to be positive in our life. We just have to think positive, take advantage of the opportunities that we get.
And I'm sure that you have a list of probably hundreds of people whom you have interviewed with those unique stories.
Exactly.
And so I don't know if you've written a book. I don't remember that.
Well, do you know I haven't. And I have an idea for 2 books, as a matter of fact. One is the stories about celebrities that you don't know. I mean, I've interviewed people who are no longer with us, like Sammy Davis Jr., Liberace, and Jose Ferrer, and Pearl Bailey, and Robert Goulet, and Mel Torme. I have stories about these people that are just amazing. So, the thing is the time. My other idea for a book is what we just talked about a little while ago. And it's tentatively called A Blessing in Disguise, about people who have been fired, divorced, things that they thought were terrible that happened to them. And then they went on to do something they never would have done if they hadn't had what they thought was a terrible thing.
I think that's the book. The other book,
Yeah.
a lot of people have written about
Exactly.
celebrities, even though knowing you would put a wonderful twist on it. But I think what you just said is the book we've all been waiting for.
Right. And the book I've been researching, and the book I just need time to write. Time so important in our lives.
Well, and actually you do so much in this local community as well as across the country that maybe it's not right for you to do that right now. Maybe there'll be a time when you won't be doing that much, and it's a good idea to have that in your mind, because writing a book does take a lot of time by yourself, where that would be a loss to society. So
Yeah.
don't do it.
No. Well, you said something when you're not doing too much. I'm always going to do too much. But you've got to make the time to do things that are important.
Takes a lot of time. So let's not worry about your book. Let's worry about all the interviews that you do. Of all the interviews with people, what about a blessing in disguise of people who were not the stars, who you were the star, and they were talking to you? What do you think happened someplace, somewhere, could be anywhere in the world, when you were being interviewed? Not that you fell off the chair or that you didn't meet your husband that way, but something that was pretty spectacular when you were being interviewed.
Well, interesting. I have not been interviewed a lot. I interview people, and I find out interesting things about them. And I started on television in 1978. I have not been off television since. My stories and what I talk to people about are their lives, not about the show they're doing, not about the part they're playing. Things that are important to them. So reruns are really important. So I am still on television in Manhattan on Time Warner with reruns, with stories about people who may not be here anymore. People will never interview them, but people that we do know. So I haven't been off television since 1978. And then when I came down here, I was on the radio, on National Public Radio for 8 years, on a panel show called Florida Forum. And then I had my own celebrity segment. And so those interviews primarily were on the telephone, in the studio. But because I do so much research, I really grab them right away. And it is so interesting to talk to people about their lives. Now, they know, when I interviewed Mel Torme, everybody told me he was going to be really tough. Not a great, talker. Well, he wrote 5 books. We interviewed him at Michael's Pub where he was performing that night. He walked in and he saw that I had all 5 books on the desk. Well, he was putty in my hands. We actually did, long story, a 3-part interview. They were 30-minute interviews because there was so much to talk about. It was his birthday. I said, you have to go home and change. No, I love it here. And it's one of the most, for me, gratifying interviews I've done.
That was lovely, yes, and that's what the research does. So let's go to research. Before we had Wikipedia and before we had the internet and Google, how did you do the research?
Unbelievable. I had to go to the library. Now, I've had assistants work for me who were great, and they said, let me do the research for you. And I would say, no. I needed to do the research. I needed to know about these people. So I would go to the library. People magazine at that time was a great resource for me. I would go to the library, I would take notes, I would make copies of things. If they wrote a book, I read the book, I brought the book with me. I was totally prepared, over-prepared, which is a good thing.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, maybe I should write the book about Arlene Herson. Then you wouldn't have to, but you'd have to spend a lot of time talking. But that's special that you just said that. The research does make the difference, but it isn't easy. Now it's much easier. So you were at a time when you had to dig, just like now for my stories, I can get almost too much because of all the research that I don't have to do that way. Someone else is doing it for me. I'd like to now go fast forward because celebrity, of course, we know that you're perfect at that and you love that. But how did you get involved with helping people talk about the Holocaust and to help fundraise for that?
Well, fundraising is really a different category. I was fortunate to have been appointed by President George W. Bush to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Now, I was appointed to the council. The council is the governing body of the Holocaust Museum. Now, it is an incredible honor to get a presidential appointment. Unfortunately, a lot of people get presidential appointments. They put it on their resume, and then they disappear. I was told by the executive director of the Holocaust Museum in D.C. that I was a poster child for a council member. I got very involved. I traveled internationally for the Holocaust Museum. I've been to Lithuania, to Romania, to Poland, to Germany, to Paris. When you represent the Holocaust Museum, it is so extraordinary because, first of all, we are an official United States government agency. So when you go, you meet the ambassadors, you meet the heads of state, you go behind the scenes. The experiences that I had were unbelievable. Going to Poland and visiting Auschwitz with the executive director of Auschwitz Museum, learning the stories from them. I mean, one story, she told us we were at the crematoriums. No, we were at the gas chambers. And she said in order to have people go to the gas chambers, the guards would say to them, for them to go willingly, things like, oh, those are nice shoes. You're going to have a shower. Leave your shoes here so they'll be dry when you come out. Or they might say, oh, I heard your family's coming on the next transport. So you take the shower, you'll be nice and clean, we give you new clothes, and you'll meet your family. Of course, they were going to the gas chambers. They were never coming out. These stories are unbelievable. In Germany, I visited Wannsee. Wannsee is a small town outside of Berlin where Hitler's people actually formulated the plan to annihilate the Jews. That's where the plan was done. So to be at that table and to see the notes which they have around under glass, that this is really where it started. I also traveled, unbelievable. I went to Dresden in Germany. Now, Dresden is has a lot of museums and ballets, whatever, but we went with the opening exhibit of Deadly Medicine. Deadly Medicine, it's the first time that an exhibit has traveled outside of the museum. Deadly Medicine was to create the master race. It showed that there was anti-Semitism way even before Hitler. But many of the experiments that they did, many of the ways that they would really be able to kill Jews, many of them were created at Dresden University. And here we are in Dresden, and we see the exhibit, and there was one quote by one of the professors, "Thank you, Hitler, for implementing our work." I mean, things I never, ever would have been part of or seen if I wasn't part of this incredible museum in Washington, D.C. Going to Lithuania, going to Romania, representing the museum. If that museum was not in Washington, D.C., people would forget. Internationally, they would want to, make believe. We know there are Holocaust deniers. There would be nothing, happening. In Romania, which was anti-Semitic before Hitler, there is a whole square block of a memorial for the Holocaust that happened in Romania, including in Romania the Gypsies. There was a big Gypsy population, so they included them, rightfully so, in this memorial. It is so amazing to see what the Holocaust Museum, the impact that it has had.
What is the history, then, of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and who was the initiator of that?
Well, I'll tell you. It's incredible because it was built, I believe it was in it was 40 years ago. So, when Carter was president. So suddenly I have a mind blank about, he just died. Oh, my God.
Oh, yes. Let's see. Yes. Oh, it was terrible. Yes, that's right. No. No, that's right. Okay, well,
oh, my God.
No, that's okay.
I've met him so many times.
Of course, that's okay.
Okay, so he went to President Carter, and said, he's a Holocaust survivor. He wrote the book Night, which was so important. So he went to President Carter, and when Carter was president, and said, we have to have a memorial we have to have something for the Holocaust Museum. So Carter said, okay, we'll build a memorial on the wall. And he said, no way. We need to learn from this. We need a museum. We don't need a memorial that you walk through. And that is how the Holocaust Museum came to be. So,
but just by their talking, he actually was able to convince President Bush.
No, it wasn't.
I'm sorry.
You said, it was President Carter. Way back.
Carter.
Okay, sorry. So the museum was built in 1993. I will tell you, over 40 million people have gone through the museum.
I have been through the museum, but I was really interested in what you just said. So that really was the beginning. It was an idea. And Carter, thank goodness, knew that was important.
Well, interesting, because some people say he's the worst former president we've ever had.
Well, I don't think that's true. I never thought that was true anyway.
But, however, he did a really good thing. So when I say over 40 million people, what percentage of those people do you think are Jewish and non-Jewish going through the Holocaust Museum? What would be your thought?
Well, of course, at the beginning, I would say 75% Jewish, but I think you're pushing me to think it's maybe half.
You're not even close.
Oh, my heavens.
90% of the people coming through the Holocaust Museum are not Jewish.
No kidding.
So, but the museum does so much, too. I mean, it affects the whole world. When I was on the council, and I'm still very involved, I was on something called the Committee on Conscience. The Committee on Conscience was formed to let the world know about any Holocausts that are happening, all over the world. Not just, the Holocaust, but what else is happening. We all know about Darfur now. We all know, but what we didn't know is it really started with the Committee on Conscience sending a mission to Darfur. They went to Chad, which is where all the refugees came because they couldn't get into Darfur. Now, it was coming back from what they learned from this mission. They went to Congress, they went to colleges, universities, schools, talked about what was happening in Darfur. And that's how many of the Save the Darfur groups started. So people don't realize it really came from the United States Holocaust Museum. We're doing work all over the world now in bringing attention. So people can't say, like they did years ago, we didn't know.
Or it's a big joke, or not a joke, but it's a lie, right? But I want everyone to know this. I have a star on my show. I have to tell you, she interviews stars, but she never sees herself as a star, but I do. Arlene Herson, Herson. She lives here in South Florida. She is so involved in many, many things, of course, as she's explained at the very beginning. But I want to talk more about this. I didn't know a lot of this from you. I didn't know how quickly you had been involved. I thought maybe when you were here, you just jumped in with fundraising. This is fabulous. If I have to tell you, Arlene, that we're probably not going to get through all this, but I think this is a great show for you. Have you done this often to tell people the whole beginning and how it all went?
When my 5-year appointment from President Bush was up, I also became national chair of their Legacy of Light Society for the Holocaust Museum, which is their endowment fund. And so I did a lot of public speaking for them as the chair of this society. I did at one point, FAU has their Humanities and Holocaust Studies. So a while ago, and this was several years ago, I did speak about the museum and tell them stories that people didn't know. And I mean, there's so much stuff. I don't know if we have time. I mean, there is a Catholic priest named Father Dubois. Terrific, wonderful guy. His family grew up in the Ukraine, and they never talked about it. Never, never, never. And so when he grew up, he said, I want to know what's going on. And he took a camera crew to the Ukraine and talked to people. Now, this is only a few years ago this started. Talked to people who were actually eyewitnesses. What happened in the Ukraine? He wrote a book called Holocaust by Bullets. What the Germans did, they would line up all of the Jews, put them in front of this big pit, as we know that this has happened, and shoot them. Now they're all in these mass graves, covered up. Some of the people that he talked to who were witness to this said they could see the ground moving, because everybody didn't die right away. Anyway, going through Lithuania, and he's now doing this in various parts of the world, he uncovered 1.5 million Jews that were buried in mass graves in Lithuania alone. In the Ukraine alone and the surrounding areas.
Absolutely unbelievable. And you are such an advocate. I wish this were televised because my mouth is not, I could catch flies. This is what you should be doing, telling all these early stories. I think this is marvelous. I wanted to ask you though, why aren't you now back on the Holocaust Museum board?
Oh, well, no. First of all, I do want to say I'm very involved with the museum. I'm still involved with the Legacy of Light Society. I'm very involved. The one big thing we do in South Florida is their luncheon. I bring a lot of people.
I know. I went. Thank you. That was amazing.
I put that together. I'm in Washington at meetings. I'm doing stuff. But a presidential appointment is a 5-year appointment from the President of the United States. Once that 5-year appointment is up, President Bush believed you did not reappoint. Give people an opportunity. He wanted to have more people be an opportunity. So when my term was up, they didn't want to let me go. So
I can believe
they created this national chair of the Legacy of Light Society. I'm still on their Wings of Memory Society, which is one of their major groups. I go to Washington, D.C. I go to meetings. I talk. So I'm always going to be involved.
You are absolutely a major source. And I was not aware of all this. I knew that you're very helpful and you do raise funds for them, but
I don't raise funds for them. No. I talk. This has never been, when I received a call from the White House to receive a presidential appointment, this is not something you buy. This is something that you get.
It's a recognition.
You don't buy a presidential appointment. They said to me, there's no monetary thing here. We'd like you to participate in any way you want to. There's no minimum. There's nothing you have to do. We want you on the council. So I am not a fundraiser. I'd rather write the check than ask people for money. So I'm involved in the museum in many ways that are really gratifying, especially now. Today there is more anti-Semitism in the world than there has been in a long time, throughout the whole world. How do we combat it? What do we do? How do we teach people not to hate?
Personally, then, the question I'd like to ask you is, why do you think that's happening?
Why do I think there's anti-Semitism all over the world?
Why is it growing?
Why is it growing? A lot has to do with what's happening throughout the world, all these protests. There are a lot of Holocaust deniers. I don't know why there's anti-Semitism. Why? Why are the Jews the scapegoats and have been for all these centuries and years? And I don't know. But it's happening, and we have to learn about it.
Well, that's why I think all the Holocaust museums are so important, that people can't deny it. And I know the one in Miami Beach is also very important. And the one thing that I'm very pleased about is so many people are writing those books. For a long time, they couldn't talk about it, but now they are writing about it.
Well, interesting. For a while, a couple of points. I was an interviewer for Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation, taking testimonies, firsthand testimonies of Holocaust survivors. This is before I was involved with the museum. So I had to take a training course. Even though I am, quote, a professional interviewer, there are different ways that you interview survivors. So I met the most incredible people. It was fascinating. I was so pleased to be part of that. Steven Spielberg only did it for 3 years and then stopped. I think it should be ongoing. The museum does do interviews as well. But an important thing the museum does, they have classes if I can call them classes, where they teach people. They teach our judges, they teach our military, they teach our school teachers, they teach our children. What happens if this kind of thing is in your life? What happens when you're told to do these things? How do you deal with it? What do you do? How do you, so there are ongoing classes. In Washington, D.C., every single policeman, because it's in Washington, D.C., takes one of these courses. Our judges, as I mentioned, our military, they want to teach you, how do you handle these terrible things? What happens if somebody tells you to do something you know is wrong? What do you do?
That's a good question. Right off the bat, I would say I wouldn't do it, but there's a lot of peer pressure, and what we've heard in the Holocaust, they shoot you. If you don't do what they tell you and you didn't want to do it, you're dead. So that made a lot of decision for a lot of people, even though they lived to regret it. Yeah,
but everybody wasn't shot. I agree. There are people that, but you weren't necessarily, there are a lot of military, a lot of people, who were given orders to do things that they knew were wrong. And how do you cope with it? What do you do? Somebody doesn't have a gun in front of you to say, I'm going to shoot you, but you know what you're asked to do is wrong.
One thing that helped me understand a lot more, because I've not been as involved, of course, minusculely, that's a word, as you, was Schindler's List.
Well, when I traveled internationally, I actually was in Schindler's shop, or whatever, where he rescued all these people, and so we actually had a chance to walk through this, which is so amazing. But exactly, here is a man, his life was on the line if they knew what he was doing, but he knew he had to do what was right. He had to do in his heart, even though it was a great risk to him and his family. So,
I just absolutely want to have you back again. More than that, there's a person who just wrote a book, lives in Aventura. You will be spellbound by her, and I definitely have to make this happen. You're just such a gem, and thank you for taking your time. It's just, I always are just enthralled with you. Thanks.
Well, thank you
Arlene
so much,
Herson.
Anita.
You're just, you never stop.
Well, this is great. Thank you.
You're welcome.